This past week has been a perfect illustration of the dilemma NASCAR currently finds itself in. We've spent a lot of time talking about throwbacks, the great history of the sport going into Darlington this weekend, but we've also spent time talking about the next gen car, the future of stock car racing. Both the past and the future have now met here in the present, and NASCAR has to decide what they're going to do next. How much change is too much too soon? Can NASCAR bridge that divide between what the old school fans want, what the new school fans want, what sponsors want, what teams want, what drivers want? Just today alone, there are reports of growing support behind renovating classic short tracks such as North Wilkesboro Speedway and Nashville Fairgrounds. While simultaneously there are reports of NASCAR trying to break into new markets with a completely different style of racing that they have not been typically known for in the past. We're going to talk about those stories and discuss the bigger picture. Is NASCAR changing too fast? Or is all this change necessary to stay relevant in today's ever-changing media world? How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove Friday edition. I hope you've had a fantastic week. Truck Series race is tonight, Xfinity tomorrow afternoon, Cup on Sunday, fingers crossed, but the weather looks great. Should be a fantastic triple header throwback weekend. We'll have plenty of racing to talk about this weekend. Also check it out down in the description. The Out of the Groove Weekly Viewer's Guide is here just in time for throwback weekend. Be sure to check that out. Out of the Groove is sponsored by Swan Security. We've got a lot to talk about here today. As I mentioned in my spiel there at the beginning, we've got two different but also similar stories to discuss. They both have to do with future NASCAR schedule changes, new tracks or potentially old tracks being reimagined, but the types of tracks we're talking about today could not be more different in my opinion. So let's begin with the old school. Earlier this week, reports came out that the Wilkes County Chamber of Commerce is calling for Speedway Motorsports to reopen North Wilkesboro Speedway. And in fact, in the Wilkes Journal Patriot, there's an image of someone actually putting up a giant banner outside the Chamber of Commerce that reads, "We want you back," with the North Wilkesboro Speedway logos on it. NASCAR has not raced at North Wilkesboro Speedway since 1996. Jeff Gordon won the final Cup Series race there, but things appear to be happening. The track has largely sat abandoned for the past decade or so, but now they've even got the attention of motorsports philanthropist, is kind of the word I'd use to describe him at this point, Marcus Lemonis, the CEO of Camping World. He tweeted in response to this report, "I'm willing to invest up to $1 million into the complex and even have a small Camping World store on property." This is not the first time that Marcus Lemonis has publicly offered support to North Wilkesboro Speedway. A few weeks back, he tweeted something very, very similar. Now, while Marcus Lemonis is very wealthy, very influential, I thought this was an interesting exchange between Dale Jr. and Rodney Childers. Rodney Childers, Kevin Harvick's crew chief, tweeted back, "I like what I'm seeing here," and Dale Jr. responded, "Only need another $80 to $100 million, presumably." So while, $1 million from Marcus Lemonis, and the moral support is valuable for sure, it's gonna take a whole lot more than that to make North Wilkesboro Speedway a reality once again, a reality on the Cup Series or any NASCAR Series schedule for that matter. But that being said, it's very exciting for fans of the old North Wilkesboro Speedway, for short track racing fans around the country, I'm sure, to see this kind of rejuvenated energy, this kind of public support pouring in for North Wilkesboro Speedway. I do think that iRacing event last year, televised on FS1 with hundreds of thousands of viewers watching it, I think that helped a ton. And Dale Earnhardt Jr. and iRacing deserve a lot of credit, I think, for this boost of attention the track has gotten. Now, it doesn't sound like anything is, imminent. I don't think we're going to see NASCAR at North Wilkesboro in the next 2 years, but keep an eye on this one, especially if Marcus Lemonis is involved. You just never know. Now, speaking of Dale Earnhardt Jr., he's publicly supported reopening North Wilkesboro Speedway, renovating it, rebuilding it. He's also been very publicly advocating for NASCAR to return to Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway. We've talked plenty about the fairgrounds. Unlike North Wilkesboro, there's actually a plan in place to renovate Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway. It just has to go through a bunch of different checks and obstacles and things, but they do have the support of the local government. They're trying to get the support of the local citizens, but NASCAR returning to the Nashville Fairgrounds in the next couple of years, I would say actually looks very, very realistic. And earlier this week, today in fact, Dale Earnhardt Jr. was at the fairgrounds to promote this weekend's ARCA East Series events, the first time the ARCA East Series has raced at the fairgrounds since 2008. But Dale Jr. was also there, as you can see in this photo, this was posted by Adam Stern from Sports Business Journal, to promote Speedway Motorsports' efforts to bring NASCAR back to the facility, to renovate the fairgrounds. There's a lot of weight in the name Dale Earnhardt Jr., so he's just out out there throwing that weight around. I don't know exactly what he said during this, but Dale Earnhardt Jr. was among those from NASCAR and Speedway Motorsports that met with the mayor of Nashville a couple months ago when the mayor of Nashville signed that letter of intent to bring NASCAR back to the fairgrounds. So Dale Earnhardt Jr. has been very much involved in Speedway Motorsports' efforts to bring Nashville Fairgrounds back into NASCAR relevancy. I believe Dale Earnhardt Jr. is also a part of the ownership group that's promoting the Nashville Street Course IndyCar event later this summer. So Dale Earnhardt Jr. has got his fingers all over Nashville, Tennessee right now. Much like Marcus Lemonis and Camping World being influential figures in the quest to potentially bring North Wilkesboro back, Dale Earnhardt Jr., huge name, very influential in the world of motorsports. It's smart of Speedway Motorsports to put his face out front when trying to promote the idea of bringing NASCAR back to the fairgrounds. So if you're a fan of these two classic short tracks, one in Tennessee, one nearby in North Carolina, this has to be an exciting day, especially that North Wilkesboro stuff, because again, for the last 10 years or so, North Wilkesboro has been largely dormant, but in the last year or so, we've seen a huge new wave of support flow forth. Current NASCAR president Steve Phelps said about a year ago that he believes NASCAR strayed a bit too far from its roots. If Nashville Fairgrounds and or North Wilkesboro Speedway truly get renovated or truly brought back to their previous or some newfound glory and NASCAR is able to return to those tracks, my goodness, that would be an amazing act of goodwill to those hardcore fans in those regions that love those racetracks, that were upset when NASCAR left them years ago. Short tracks in the southeastern United States doesn't get a whole lot closer to NASCAR's roots than that. But now we've talked about the old school tracks, now we've got to talk about some of the new ideas that are being reported today. The world is always evolving and NASCAR is no different. According to Adam Stern from Sports Business Journal, Ben Kennedy says NASCAR has started putting together preliminary drafts of the 2022 schedule. He eventually wants to expand its schedule presence to the Pacific Northwest and broader North America. And then a bit more specific, Mexico City and Denver are among the possible locations for future NASCAR street races on top of the current primary target of Chicago. Wow, a couple of surprises there. First, I'm a bit surprised they're only just now beginning the conversations about next year's schedule. Like, it's already May. I mean, traditionally, by this point on the calendar, next year's schedule has already been released to the public, already been confirmed, so they must be once again trying to take some pretty big swings between this year and next year. That's why it's going slower than usual. That's a little surprising. But two, you heard in that first tweet, NASCAR is seriously looking to expand their presence across North America. That means not just the continental United States, maybe Canada gets a race. He mentions in that second tweet there that Mexico City is being considered for a road course or street course race. NASCAR has raced in Mexico City before. The Xfinity Series has, the NASCAR Peak Mexico Series does, and it's a very nice track. Formula One races there, so I could see Mexico City happening. But aside from, international racing, looks like NASCAR is also considering races out west. Denver, Colorado is being mentioned, the Pacific Northwest, maybe Portland. Those are markets that NASCAR has not visited in quite some time, so that would be interesting. But this is what I'm getting at. NASCAR's new car, the next gen car, is built for road courses and short tracks. And so what are we talking about here today? We're talking about a couple of old school short tracks potentially being renovated, North Wilkesboro and the fairgrounds, and we're talking about road and street courses. Chicago, that street course is still being planned. We'll see if that comes to fruition by next year. But NASCAR's not stopping there. Sounds like they're interested in Mexico, maybe something else out west. I didn't even mention the Auto Club short track that's still expected to be renovated in the next year or so, turning that 2-mile speedway into a short track. So while NASCAR on one hand is very focused on revitalizing old kind of long forgotten tracks that they strayed too far away from in the 2000s, in the same breath they're also trying to expand to completely new markets. Some markets in this case have not had NASCAR Cup Series racing there. Others have not had any NASCAR racing in a number of years. NASCAR is trying to expand potentially internationally. They're going after new fans while also trying to rekindle that support amongst some of their most hardcore, longtime, passionate fans. This is a difficult tightrope to walk, and that's what I want to discuss most importantly in this episode. Because this is an edge that NASCAR has been flirting with for, pretty much forever, but especially I'd say in the last 15 years, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. Managing change while not alienating the core fans that like NASCAR for what it is at the time. It's not an easy gap to cross, but it's one NASCAR has tried to for many years now, and I would say they've probably failed more often than they've succeeded. Although with 2022 already set to bring forth some of the most significant changes NASCAR has seen in decades, I think current leadership believes the time is now. If we're already changing the cars entirely, now's the time to make all the major changes that we believe will propel NASCAR into the future for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. There's a tweet I saw today that motivated me to make this episode. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but I think this tweet perfectly encapsulates the dilemma NASCAR has long found itself in, but especially today. today. This tweet is from Steve Carnes. He's a longtime NASCAR fan who also, I believe, is a sponsor of some Xfinity Series teams, or has been in the past. Again, I'm not attacking him. I don't want any of you guys to go out there and start tweeting at him or anything like that. Like, he's completely entitled to his opinion. I don't think he's wrong by any means. I'm just using this tweet as an example, a jumping off point, if you will. So again, he seems like a good dude. I don't want anyone to go after him for this. But anyway, here's what his tweet said. In response to the possibility of street courses being added to the NASCAR schedule, Steve tweeted, "I'm losing touch with this sport as a fan for 44 years. This is not NASCAR. We don't need street races. We need more short tracks, if anything." So firstly, just at face value, I agree that we need more short tracks. I think the point of all these new short tracks and road courses is to eventually get away from many of the mile-and-a-half intermediates that most fans and even many drivers alike don't seem to enjoy. But the sentiments in that tweet right there, I believe, are shared by many, many fans of NASCAR. In fact, there are probably fans of you that watch my show that probably agree with a lot of what Steve tweeted right there. The point of this video is not to try and say that his opinion is wrong. My point is just to show that that is a very real opinion that is held by, I think, many NASCAR fans. So that's why whatever steps NASCAR continues to take going forward, they need to step carefully and be wary of fans like Steve, because those fans do exist, and I believe they exist in significant numbers. I'm not somebody who believes NASCAR should completely ignore the old fans in favor of young fans, and at the same time, I don't think NASCAR should, never change and only cater to the old fans. There has to be a happy medium there, and that's what we're going to talk about. I think NASCAR has identified that happy medium. A lot is changing right now, but many of the changes I believe are necessary to stay relevant to sponsors and especially to current and potentially new manufacturers, which in something as expensive as motorsports, sponsors and OEMs very important. But I think NASCAR is doing a very good job of splitting these changes up almost perfectly in half. As we've talked about in this episode, some of the changes I think are directly targeting the old school fans, the fans like Steve there that want more short tracks. I mean, Auto Club Speedway is being turned into a short track. NASCAR's footing the bill for that one. Speedway Motorsports is trying to bring the Nashville Fairgrounds back, trying to bring North Wilkesboro back. If all three of those tracks are reimagined and are added to the schedule in the next, say, 5 years, that's 3 more short tracks that I think will be very well received by hardcore, long-time stock car racing fans. But at the same time, I think the other half of these changes are clearly targeting new fans, or potential new fans. People who may not be NASCAR fans yet, but that NASCAR is hoping they can convert over the next few years. And that's where things like iRacing come into play. NASCAR's been promoting iRacing sim racing because that's a great way for young fans to kind of dip their toe into the racing world, if you will, to understand it a little bit better. That's where these reports of a Chicago street course, it's the 3rd largest city in the United States. If you run a race in the streets of Chicago, just naturally, hundreds of thousands of people are going to see your event, many of whom are not racing fans, but may become racing fans by the end of that weekend. Same goes for Mexico City. That's NASCAR going international, trying to diversify its fan base, which is something that young fans do value. There's the new car, of course, as well, which is, tailored for road courses and short tracks, of course, but also, as I mentioned, the new car is much more technically advanced than the existing NASCAR Gen 6 cars. It's something that potential sponsors, namely manufacturers, will be happy to race. As we talked about earlier this week, I believe the success of the next gen car is almost solely dependent on how many new manufacturers enter the sport in the next 5 or 10 years. Do they get more than 1 or 2 new manufacturers alongside Ford, Chevy, and Toyota? If that's the case, I think this car will be considered a success. So in conclusion, there does have to be some compromise. It's difficult to find a thing that young kids really like and older adults like. It's hard to find things that cross over between those two wildly different demographics. But I think NASCAR is treading that line extremely carefully, and I think they're treading that line very effectively at the moment. New car, new markets, new street courses, iRacing, that's them chasing new potential fans. And NASCAR does need younger fans. Not at the expense of older fans, but we've talked about this chart. This was from Sports Business Journal back in 2016. Per their data, NASCAR had the fastest aging TV audience of any major sport in America. You can see the chart right here. Again, it stops at 2016, but NASCAR doesn't have the oldest current fan base, but you can see that jump from 2006 to 2016. NASCAR's fan base jumped higher in age than any other sport. And you can see NASCAR's fan base is still older than, Major League Baseball, the WNBA, the Olympics. This is not debatable. NASCAR has to find a way to reach younger audiences. And in the last year or so, they've done a pretty good job. Remember this other graph? This was a poll from Morning Consult we talked about at the end of last year. They found that NASCAR was the 9th fastest growing brand last year among Gen Z adults, ages 18 to 23. That's like my demographic. So I think last year, NASCAR took a pretty solid step forward in chasing the new fan. But now, going forward, NASCAR is trying to prove to its existing fan base, its longtime passionate fans, that they haven't forgotten about them either. bringing back the fairgrounds, hopefully, bringing back North Wilkesboro, possibly, turning Auto Club, a 2-mile track, into an action-packed Bristol-style short track. I think that'll make people happy. Think about the throwback weekend this weekend at Darlington. This tradition began, in like 2015, and it's become a fan favorite that I'm sure many older and longtime fans appreciate. You could say this just makes NASCAR a fence sitter. They should pick one angle and commit to it, but I think NASCAR's smart in this case. I think it's smart to not alienate half your fan base or any significant portion of it. I think it's important, if you're able to be able to walk that line and appease both as much as possible. You know, some fans, older school fans, aren't gonna like all the new road courses. They probably haven't watched any of the iRacing. It doesn't appeal to them. But sometimes compromises need to be made. The entire world is changing. Motorsports are changing. The way people view, the way people think about motorsports is changing. Cars are not nearly as important to the average person today as they were 20, 30, 50 years ago. There's more on TV, there's more on the internet, more competing for people's attention every minute of every day. Sports viewership across the country has largely tanked in the past couple of years. Motorsports has to get ahead of this curve. They've got to figure out how they appeal to the next generation of fans while also maintaining that core audience that's gotten them to the size and scale they are at today. So that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode, sort of discuss NASCAR's strategy, current strategy, and strategy going forward. Let me know what you guys think down below. Are you excited about the street courses and new markets potentially? Are you excited about the possible revitalization of classic short tracks? Let me know which side of this you fall on. I'd like to think that I fall on both. I mean, I didn't grow up watching races at North Wilkesboro or the Nashville Fairgrounds, but I'd love to see them come back, especially if they're new, if they're revamped. I would absolutely love to see it. But at the same time, I'm pretty pumped about the possibility of racing through the streets of Chicago or even Mexico City, expanding internationally a little bit. I think that would be really, really cool as well. So I also don't want to sound like some pathetic fence sitter. I know you guys expect a talking head like me to pick one side or the other. One's right, one's wrong. I can't do that. That's not me. If you've watched my show for any amount of time, you guys know I like to see the good and the bad in pretty much any decision that is made. But let me know down in the comments what your thoughts on all this we discussed are. That's gonna do it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR news, rumors, predictions every single day. This week we'll have some race reviews as well, maybe some more Rocket League NASCAR streams. Also a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters. I couldn't do the show without your tremendous support. I'll be back this weekend, triple header at Darlington. Gonna be a lot to discuss. Have a fantastic rest of your Friday and take care.